But first, I gotta say, some kneecaps were bitten last night in Kansas City, Missouri.
Kneecap.
Everybody got kneecaps last night in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium because the Detroit Lions, who everybody, the national media included, and by the way, still are today. I'll get into that as this segment progresses, but just totally disrespected. Vegas really did, and they only made Kansas City a 4-point favorite, which I felt was appropriate. I actually took the Detroit Lions to cover that spread, to take them with the points, take them to +4, but Kansas City to win outright in a walk-off field goal. Of course, I was wrong on this individual game outcome, but Detroit went to Kansas City, won the game 21-20. Did it, by the way, in a game-winning drive in the fourth quarter with about 7 minutes to go. You had a great rushing attack for Detroit. You had Jared Goff playing an excellent game. I know the stats aren't mind-blowing, but he didn't turn the football over. Something, by the way, he hasn't thrown a pick in well over 300 attempts. I think he's right now third or fourth all-time on the list of consecutive passes thrown without an interception. So Goff is playing turnover-free ball. He made some big-time throws. You could talk about, hey, they're playing dink and dunk, try to keep the ball to Mahomes' hands, these big, long drives. But I think it's the fact that Goff was able to make those throws under pressure, by the way. There was one throw in the second half where an unblocked Kansas City defensive back is coming for Jared Goff, and if he waits a split second too long to hit Amon-Ra St. Brown on the left side, it looks like it was against the zone coverage there, he gets destroyed. He may get sacked, he may get strip sacked, and he made some big-time throws all night long. And I said Jared Goff, to me, is one of the 12 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And the Detroit Lions defense, I think, as well, too, was shockingly good. I thought, and listen, we'll talk about Kansas City and Tony's drops and Sky Moore's drops and the pick six, obviously, but Detroit's ability, we talk about Detroit having a good offensive line, we forget how good Kansas City's is. Creed Humphrey is an excellent center. You got what's his name? Trey Smith at the University of Tennessee, my guy, who's an excellent, gets a little handsy in terms of holding calls, but is good in terms of run blocking, is a solid pass blocker when he's technically sound. That's a very good Kansas City offensive line. It's why Mahomes has had the success he's had really ever since he's been in Kansas City, as they continue to upgrade that unit. But I think what was and what is just mind-boggling to me going into this game last night and coming into today, this morning in particular, with all the morning debate shows, radio shows, podcasts, any content creation, whatever the case may be, is the fact that going into this one, the whole narrative was, Kansas City's going to dominate. Even without Kelsey, even without Chris Jones, they're going to dominate Detroit. Detroit's not ready for this big stage, and Arrowhead, it's too much, it's too loud. Jared Goff, we were talking about that in the 8 o'clock spot with my man Alfred. I love Alfred, love the guy, but he was talking about, and a lot of people were talking about how Jared Goff doesn't like these big pressurized situations, doesn't like these big games, and Detroit never wins these big games. And then when they win, the narrative is, what is wrong with Kansas City? I even saw one question on ESPN this morning. Is the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty? Well, is it in the balance right now? Even today, we are disrespecting Mike Tirico, who I think is a tremendous broadcaster, on NBC, was talking about alluding to the fact how there might be an asterisk next to this Detroit Lions win, given the fact that the Chiefs were without Kelsey, they were without Chris Jones, and of course, Kadarius Toney didn't help Kansas City's cause with the 3 drops he had and the 1 catch for 1 yard. As if we're just ignoring the fact that Dan Campbell, from the jump, and I love this about him, folks. And this isn't hindsight 2020. Like, I love the hire to happen. You could go back and watch the tape when the Detroit Lions hired Dan Campbell to be their guy. I ripped the hire. Saw that opening press conference. You heard the soundbite there about the biting kneecaps, and I was like, God, this is what they trust to get the Lions back to. I shouldn't even say back to relevance. They haven't won a playoff game in 30 freaking years since Barry Sanders was there. So back to relevance. They haven't been in relevance for 3 decades since the first Bush was president, for crying out loud. This is going to be the guy? Hated the hire. They went 3-13-1 that first year he was there, and I'm like, I don't think this is going to work. Last year they improved 9-8. And we often overlook this so often with head coaches. Yes, they can be great in terms of the X's and the O's. Andy Reid is if you're going to compare Andy Reid to, even though I didn't think he called that good of a game, the reverse on 3rd and short in the fourth quarter was was very confusing. But if you're going to compare Andy Reid to Dan Campbell in terms of X's and O's, it's not even a contest. Andy Reid's one of the greatest offensive coaches ever. Every quarterback works with Andy Reid. He's a quarterback whisperer, in a sense. And this isn't even a shot at Reid. This is just talking about all coaches in general. I'm not so sure there's that many head coaches forgetting the NFL. Even college football. You even want to include high school football, you do that as well. That have developed a culture in Detroit. That is, we so often look past that word. We look at talent, as we should. You can't win this league, or any league, without talent. You need smart coaches. Detroit has them. Good defensive coordinator, excellent offensive coordinator, although, again, I didn't think he called the greatest game. A little bit of a sloppy night for the offenses, but it's week 1 that happens. They'll get better as the season progresses. But Dan Campbell's developed a culture in Detroit where they never believe they're out of it. They had a fumble down in the red zone. Remember this? Where the game is tied. So Detroit scores off of, obviously, the fake punt, which the kahunas of Dan Campbell to try a fake punt on 4th and 2 inside of his own 20. Detroit wasn't just happy to be here. They weren't happy to be the first road team represented in the National Football League season in the year of our Lord 2023. They said, no, screw that. We're here to win this game. We're here to go into Arrowhead and beat the champs. They try the fake punt. They end up converting. They go on to score that drive. Kansas City answers right back. Mahomes with a touchdown drive. And then the next one, remember, Detroit's driving. They get in the red zone, and Marvin Jones fumbles. And it's like this, how many teams in the NFL, particularly teams that we don't view as these successful franchises like a Kansas City or a San Francisco, a Pittsburgh, or a Baltimore. Think about franchises like the Arizona Cardinals, the Cleveland Browns, the Washington Commanders. Historically, those franchises, when they get down there and you have a Marvin Jones or a guy like him fumble in that situation, when you've got the momentum, you feel good about yourself. Okay, we're clicking offensively. How many times does it just take the wind out of your sails? Detroit didn't let that affect him because the culture that Dan Campbell has set. And I love that when he was asked after the game about, what did you learn from this win? He said, I didn't learn anything. It's the belief from the coaches and his players, and therefore the belief of the players in the head coach. That is something I have beaten this table for the last 4.5 months. The Detroit Lions will participate and play in the NFC title game. That is an elite offense that didn't even play that well. They had 2 great, you could argue the drive where Marvin Jones fumbled. They obviously moved the ball there. But even their first touchdown drive needed a fake punt to score there. Then they have the second drive where they get down the red zone. They come away with nothing because of the fumble. And, of course, they had the clutch drive in the fourth quarter led by Jared Goff. And the running game with a tremendous offensive line in Detroit. And they take the lead, which they never relinquished, of course. But the Lions didn't even play that well offensively. So you think about the games in a dome in Detroit. You think about playing defenses that we understand Kansas City is missing Chris Jones. That's a talented young secondary in Kansas City. We saw all throughout the postseason. Kansas City will get Chris Jones back. More on the Chiefs in a moment. But I think we are often so blinded at times with the whole narrative coming in the game. Like, well, if Kansas City doesn't win, then it's because the Chiefs didn't play well and not because Detroit did. Or Detroit did play well. Yes, Kansas City made their mistakes. Again, I'll get into them in just a moment. But this notion like, oh, Detroit's not supposed to win this game, the guys knows that locker room doesn't believe that. Dan Campbell doesn't believe that. Love this win by Detroit. Love it. I may have picked Kansas City to win, albeit I did take Lions +4. But this is the kind of culture you can set in Detroit. And they'll take this. Trust me, the rest of the season. They go into Kansas City and win, and it's, what's wrong with Kansas City? Well, how about what's right with Detroit? We ever thought about that for a moment? Both teams made mistakes. Both teams were sloppy. Both teams had penalties. Matter of fact, Detroit had some killer penalties in the second half. The Cam Sutton pass interference, while it was a little touchy, it was by the books, by the rule book, that is pass interference. They had some killer penalties at times. But it's the ability to overcome that, to move past adversity. Again, we forget how difficult it is to play in Kansas City, in Arrowhead Stadium, which is arguably the loudest stadium in professional sports. Hats off to the Detroit Lions, man. It's games like that. I know we're one weekend, and you certainly don't want to overreact, but I don't think I am overreacting because of the fact that I've been high on this team all offseason. It's the fact to be able to win games like that on the road. the momentum it can bring is incredible. So hats off to the Detroit Lions. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.